In a fleeting span of 4 seconds, triggered by a routine wingover of a U.S. Air Force F-16, the silent borderlines stretching across the rugged canyons and chaparral suddenly blew open like the lid of a crate full of explosives. When the Mexican shoulder-fired missiles streaked upward, tearing through the dusty air thick with the scent of dry sagebrush, the entire border sector entered a chain reaction that no one could stop. The F-16 Block 50 of the United States Air Force had executed an unusually low-altitude bank while patrolling the southwestern sector. The pilot, Captain Miller, initially only intended to adjust altitude to check a strange signal blinking on his radar warning receiver. But the bank angle he initiated caused the Mexican soldiers on the ground to misinterpret the maneuver as a fighter jet rolling in for an attack run. When he pulled the stick to the left, the Pratt & Whitney engine roared, compressing air down onto the tallest mesquite trees, creating a wash of heat powerful enough to shred the fragile canopy clinging to the mountainside. At the Mexican border outpost near Monument 247, that sound caused the entire unit to jump. They had endured weeks of continuous tension following rumors that the U.S. was ramping up border patrols. Consequently, the appearance of an F-16 at such low altitude was immediately viewed as a dangerous incursion. In less than a minute, a man-pads team was deployed, locking onto the target based on the thermal signature from the jet's exhaust. Captain Reyes, a man with over 10 years of experience in the Mexican border forces, ordered fire almost by reflex when he saw the jet's wings tilt. He believed that if they didn't shoot immediately, the aircraft would penetrate deeper into Mexican territory. The missile launched at supersonic speed. Captain Miller heard the missile inbound warning scream in his headset, but his reaction time was practically zero. At such low altitude, he couldn't pull up to evade. The tail of the jet was blown apart by a massive explosion. The sound of wind twisting metal and blaring red alerts instantly merged into a cacophony. As the F-16 lost control and entered a flat spin, Miller was forced to pull the ejection handle. A sharp pop rang out, and the seat rocketed him through the smoke. High winds caught his chute, pushing him off course from the safe zone and dropping him right into the dense scrubland between the American and Mexican patrol lines. Seconds later, the F-16 slammed into the canyon wall. The explosion cracked like dry thunder, throwing fire into the gray sky. Thick black smoke billowed up, confirming to the naked eye that a major incident had occurred. U.S. Command immediately received the lost contact signal and engaged emergency response protocols. 2 ground recon teams, a sniper section, and a small tactical drone were dispatched straight toward the rising smoke. They had a single objective: secure the pilot before Mexico did. No one knew what the Mexican side was thinking about the explosion, and that uncertainty made the race deadly. But the Mexican side viewed everything through a completely different lens. Shooting down an American jet put their entire border defense unit on high alert. Reyes ordered PKM machine gun teams, M203 Grenadiers, and an RPG squad to advance toward the crash site to ensure the Americans could not access the scene. In his mind, the U.S. might be preparing a military retaliation, and they had to secure the terrain advantage before being pushed back. The first U.S. surveillance drone approached the burn zone just minutes after Mexican troops began moving. The device hovered amidst thin wisps of smoke, trying to scan for heat signatures, but from the ground, a Mexican soldier spotted the metallic glint above the canopy and immediately opened fire with a 12.7 millimeters heavy machine gun. The first burst shook the drone violently. The second forced it to bank away to avoid being downed. This prompted Lieutenant Reynolds of the U.S. Army to immediately switch to a deterrent attack plan. 2 shooters from the sniper section crawled up a rock ledge, pressed themselves into the dirt, and locked onto the Mexican observation post. The first shot cracked through the wooden shielding, shattering the Mexican optics but injuring no one. However, that was more than enough to convince Mexico that the U.S. was intentionally initiating an attack to seize control of this forest sector. Neither side spoke to the other. No official warnings were sent. No one took a step back. Every action played out in a chain of misunderstandings, and every bullet brought the 2 forces one step closer to war. When a U.S. squad advanced close to border Monument 43, Mexico quickly positioned forces to intercept. Reyes received intelligence that American troops were moving in tactical formation, convincing him they weren't just looking for a pilot, but preparing to seize the sector. So when the American team stepped out of a patch of dark brush, a Mexican AK-47 team fired first, a warning burst that impacted too close to the Americans. An M203 round followed, detonating dirt and rock just meters from the U.S. formation, forcing them to seek cover. 2 American soldiers suffered minor injuries. Battlefield reflexes kicked in, and they immediately retaliated with M4 carbines and a tactical shotgun. An American fragmentation grenade tossed toward the Mexican line exploded, wounding one of their men. Withdrawal was no longer on anyone's mind. Once blood was spilled, both sides believed the other had attacked first. The firefight spread rapidly. Mexican AKs laid down pressure to the left, U.S. M203S answered from the right. US M249 saw gunners used suppressive fire to maintain a safe distance. Mexican PKMs ripped back with long bursts, punching through tree trunks, shattering bark, and spraying sawdust into the air. 5.5, 6 millimeters, and 7. 62 millimeters rounds crisscrossed through the smoke, creating sharp snaps like whips cracking the air. The distance between the two sides closed to less than 60 meters at points too close for an unintended skirmish. Both forces were backed into a head-on confrontation. Each believed that retreating meant being overrun and destroyed. American soldiers had to crawl through rock crevices to drag wounded buddies out, while Mexico fanned out its forces to suppress incoming fire. Smoke from the jet crash mixed with the smell of gunpowder, damp earth, and burning plastic, plunging the entire area into a smog-choked haze. The roar of falling trees, shouting voices, suppressing fire, and clashing metal echoed across the canyon walls. Then the thing no one wanted happened. Mexico decided to escalate the combat level. From the distance came the heavy roar of engines and the grinding sound of steel against rock. 2 DN-11 armored personnel carriers and an ERC-90 Lynx were advancing into the zone. On the American side, command responded by deploying a Stryker Dragoon, along with a Javelin anti-tank team to the front line. From a minor friction point, the skirmish had mutated into a combined arms mechanized threat, waiting for the exact moment to blow wide open. The sound of armored engines from the Mexican side caused the entire U.S. unit to shift combat posture. The screech of metal tearing up the dirt road engines, revving in distinct beats and tracks, grinding stones under the weight of steel armor, rang out clearly in the mountain silence. The U.S. recon teams looked at each other for a brief second. Everyone understood that from this moment on, the battle was no longer limited to infantry. The appearance of the DN-11 and ERC-90 meant Mexico had decided to expand the conflict intensity to a mechanized level. And once armor enters the fray, diplomatic intervention becomes meaningless. The first Mexican DN-11 surged out from the tree line. Its dark green steel hull broke through the shadows like a predator that had lurked too long in the dark. The heavy machine gun on its turret immediately swiveled and swept, firing long bursts through the foliage. Ancient mesquite trees standing before the American troops were shredded in seconds, wood shattering like glass. Fine sawdust dispersed in the wake of the bullets like a mist. These rounds weren't aimed directly at men, but they forced the American troops to abandon their positions, as staying put meant being perforated instantly. From the rear Mexican line, the ERC-90 Lynx appeared slower but heavier. Its low-profile turret rotated right to 90 millimeters cannon, recoiling slightly with every movement. Mexican mechanized infantry immediately dismounted from the rear, splitting into two wings. One group carried PKMs, the other RPGs, and M203S. They all advanced toward the right flank, attempting to cut off the American retreat. Realizing the situation was shifting too fast, Lieutenant Reynolds immediately radioed forward command. Minutes later, from the western ridge, the engine of the Stryker Dragoon roared to life. The modern U.S. armored vehicle charged in like a frantic arrow cutting through the dust. Its sharp-angled frontal armor, painted in desert woodland mix, combined with fire control radar, made it look like a block of aggressive steel tearing through the wind of the hot zone. The Stryker barely stopped before activating its 30 millimeters turret. The cannon spun fast, aiming straight at the Mexican DN-11, attempting to flank. The mechanized battle began with a crisp thumping of the 30 millimeters cannon. The sound was so resonant the ground beneath the American infantry vibrated like thunder. Armor-piercing rounds flew in a flat trajectory, raking across the frontal armor of the DN-11. The Mexican vehicle shuddered violently, throwing up dirt and debris. A section of its frontal armor caved in, visibly forcing the driver to halt temporarily. The ERC-90 reacted immediately. Its 90 millimeters gun cracked, deafeningly firing straight at the Stryker. The shell slammed into the ground just meters from the American vehicle, blasting out a crater the size of a well. American soldiers hit the dirt instantly. Debris and rocks pinged off their body armor, creating a terrifying sense of vulnerability. At the edge of the brush, the U.S. Javelin team was ordered to advance. 2 soldiers carrying the launch unit moved low, using berms and remaining trees for cover. The gunner extended the launch tube and propped it up. His spotter attached the CLU command launch unit and checked the battery. When the Javelin powered up, a short tone beeped and the thermal seeker scanned the heat-noisy forest. Just as the ERC-90 rotated its turret again, the Javelin locked on. The target was less than 200 meters away, perfect for a direct attack shot. But just as the American soldier prepared to squeeze the trigger, a volley from a Mexican recoilless rifle slammed in. The weapon roared like an enraged beast. The round struck the ground near the Javelin team, throwing earth and rock, forcing the 2 soldiers to dive apart. The hot blast and smoke washed over them, knocking the Javelin off its lock. The ERC-90 escaped death by a hair's breadth. Meanwhile, the Mexican PKM team was flooding the northern sector. PKM rounds arced across the area in front of the American troops, forcing them to break into smaller elements and retreat into thicker brush. U.S. M249S responded with medium-range suppression, keeping a safe distance but remaining intense enough to prevent the Mexican troops from closing in. The first DN-11, despite taking 30mm hits, tried to reform its line. Smoke billowed from the dent in its armor, but its systems were operational. Its heavy turret gun opened up again, sweeping the hillside. American troops had to dive from their cover to avoid the large caliber rounds. A tree trunk thick enough to stop 5.56mm was useless against heavy rounds. 3 hits were enough to explode the wood like a bundle of firewood split by an axe. Realizing the situation would become untenable if they didn't neutralize at least one enemy vehicle, Lieutenant Reynolds ordered the Javelin team to reposition and try again. The 2 soldiers crawled along a jagged rock ridge to find a better angle. In front of them, the ERC-90 was trying to shift right to evade the Striker's 30mm arc, but that movement exposed a perfect gap. The American soldier reshouldered the tube, locking on again. The frame of the ERC-90 glowed clearly on the thermal sight. The lock indicator turned red, ready to fire. Wind gunfire engines, everything seemed to get sucked into a vacuum for a single moment. When the trigger was squeezed, the Javelin ejected, rocketing away at extreme speed, leaving a trail of white smoke through the canopy. Simultaneously, Mexico fired another recoilless rifle round toward the hill where the Javelin team stood. The round slammed into the rock, creating a sharp metallic explosion. The American troops scrambled down the reverse slope to avoid shrapnel. Despite the incoming fire, the Javelin held true. It struck the flank of the ERC-90, causing an explosion so powerful the entire canyon floor shook. The vehicle tipped onto its left side fire, and smoke erupting from the engine block. The rear hatch blew open. Mexican soldiers scrambled out. Some were wounded. Others rolled into the bushes for cover. Seeing the ERC-90 destroyed Mexican troops intensified their fire with PKMs and RPGs to stop the U.S. advance. But conversely, this only made the Americans more determined to push up. The Stryker continued pounding 30mm rounds into the remaining DN-11, forcing it to retreat into the tree line to avoid penetration. USM 249S switched a long suppressing burst, keeping the ground ahead saturated with lead. The border forest, once silent, now vibrated with the rhythm of cannon fire. Earth-exploded dry leaves caught fire from tracers. Patches of the forest blurred in the thick smoke. Soldiers on both sides could no longer see the enemy clearly, only the muzzle flashes and screams amidst the roaring engines. The skirmish had far exceeded a confused clash. It had morphed into a company-level battle with APCs, recoilless rifles, RPGs, PKMs, M203S, M249S, and 30mm autocannons joining the fight less than 30 minutes after the F-16 went down. And amidst all that chaos, pilot Captain Miller had still not been found. Smoke from the burning ERC-90 rose into a thick black pillar twisting into the canopy before thinning in the wind, leaving the distinct acrid smell of hot metal and burning diesel. That smoke wasn't just a sign the U.S. had destroyed a key Mexican asset, it was a clear warning the battle was out of control on the ground. Shouts, radio calls, and the detonation of PKM and RPG rounds spiraled into the tense atmosphere, making everyone feel the heavy weight on the back of their necks. The remaining Mexican DN-11 was hiding under a thick cluster of trees, trying to mask its position to evade the Stryker. Its driver slowed down to traverse the slope laterally, minimizing turret exposure. But the sensor suite on the Stryker wasn't easily fooled. The American driver maintained a slow speed to stabilize the gun while the gunner adjusted the thermal optics. The large heat signature from the DN-11's engine burned on the screen like a bright red dot against the cool gray-green of the mountains. The Stryker rotated its turret, elevated the gun slightly, and opened fire. The 30mm cannon barked, sweeping 3 heavy bursts toward the shadows where the DN-11 lurked. The entire hillside shook with the impact. Dirt was thrown high, trees were sawed in half, and the DN-11's left side armor took 2 armor-piercing hits, denting the steel deep and tilting the vehicle. Inside, Mexican soldiers screamed for the driver to reverse, but the front left suspension was shattered, causing the vehicle to lurch as if yanked back by an invisible rope. Seeing an opportunity, Mexican troops deployed an RPG team from down the slope trying to flank the Stryker and hit its blind spot. 2 soldiers carrying RPG 7 seconds ran along a narrow trail, ducking behind fallen logs, sweat beading on their foreheads despite the mountain wind. The gunner hoisted the tube to his shoulder, checking the angle. The hardest part wasn't aiming, but getting close enough for the RPG 7 to penetrate the Stryker's armor. They had to get within 180 to 200 meters. Any further, and penetration was unlikely. But the U.S. sniper team had detected the movement on the slope. Opposite them, one of the 2 snipers traversed his rifle, adjusted his scope, and locked onto the soldier carrying the RPG. The moment before the man squeezed the trigger, the sniper rifle cracked dry and short, almost drowned out by the 30 millimeters booming in the background. The Mexican soldier crumbled the RPG, sliding off his shoulder and rolling into the dirt. His partner flinched, turning back, but before he could react, a USM 249 burst tore across his path, forcing him to dive into a ditch. Meanwhile, on the left flank, another group of Mexican soldiers was hunting the American Javelin team. They understood that if the Javelins weren't neutralized as soon as possible, their remaining vehicles were sitting ducks. 3 soldiers with AKs and 1 with an M203 crossed a narrow wooded path, hugging the rock face to flank. Soft sounds, footsteps on dry twigs, fabric brushing bark were all drowned out by the deafening combat. The 2 American Javelin troops were trying to reload a second missile. The gunner braced the CLU against a rock while the assistant pulled a fresh tube from his pack. They knew that after killing the ERC-90, their position was compromised. Just as they finished reloading, the thump of a Mexican M203 rang out. The grenade exploded a short distance away. Shrapnel peppered the rock face like a handful of gravel. The Americans ducked popping smoke to mask their position. Thick, white smoke billowed out, blanketing the ridge. Before it cleared, an AK burst swept over their heads. The assistant rolled right, dragging the spare tube, while the gunner leaned left, hoisting the Javelin to acquire a new target. But this time they weren't aiming at a vehicle, they were aiming at a cluster of Mexican troops, rushing them from 100 meters out, trying to break the assault. Realizing the enemy was closing too fast, the rear U.S. element decided to provide support by moving an M203 team to higher ground to fire plunging rounds into the tree line. The grenades detonated in the canopy, creating small flashes and raining shrapnel and leaves. Each explosion was lethal. 1 Mexican soldier was thrown by a blast just 3 meters away. 2 others were wounded and forced to retreat to the tree line. In the southern sector, another U.S. squad was maneuvering to support the search for Captain Miller. They split into 3 fire teams of 4, moving straight toward the black smoke. Finding the pilot was now incredibly difficult, as the entire zone was a battlefield with high combat density. Any movement could be mistaken for the enemy. Meanwhile, Mexico began deploying reinforcements from the rear. 2 fresh squads arrived, one with PKMs and RPDs, the other with RPGs and B-40 rockets, older RPG variants. They advanced in spread formation to minimize casualties from the 30 millimeters cannon. Upon reaching the edge of the woods, they established a perimeter defense, locking down the American advance with a heavy net of fire. The Striker opened up again with its 30 millimeters, hammering the area where the new Mexican troops appeared, throwing up dirt in long streaks of light. Mexican PKMs returned continuous suppressing fire at the Striker, forcing it to reverse slightly to the left to find a hold-down position. An RPG team seized the moment the Striker shifted, ran up a small rock outcropping, and fired a rocket straight at the hull. The RPG streaked out like a dark green missile. An American gunner saw it from a distance and screamed, "RPG incoming!" The Striker pivoted its hull backward quickly. The rocket skimmed past the rear slat armor, slamming into a massive tree and detonating, bringing the whole tree crashing down. To the east, a group of American soldiers heard the tree fall and used the new gap to push forward. But as they approached, Mexican AK and PKM fire swept back at them. 1 American took a hit to the arm and went down. 2 others dragged him into a crevice to apply a tourniquet. The pressure from Mexico was so intense that even with armor support, the U.S. couldn't extend its line too far. Gunfire was ceaseless. Cannons pounded and trees fell one after another. The battle had stretched into an arc over a kilometer long, encompassing canyon ridges, thick brush trails, and narrow ravines. Both sides were locked in a stalemate. No one wanted to leave. Amidst this chaos, a thermal signal scanned by the U.S. drone relayed information that changed the entire tactical picture for command. They detected signs that Captain Miller was still alive, lying deep in the combat zone not far from the damaged DN-11. Saving the pilot was no longer a secondary support mission. It became the center of the entire operation. A controversial decision was made. The U.S. would insert special forces directly into the firefight. The news that Miller was alive spread through the American internal comms network, triggering the unit's protective instincts. Whether a seasoned veteran or a rookie, no one in the U.S. force could accept leaving a pilot behind in a canyon where bullets hissed constantly overhead. Lieutenant Reynolds received the drone feed showing a thermal signature matching a human shape lying motionless between 2 trees, snapped by the jet crash. The distance from the main line was only 300 meters, but crossing that distance through a crossfire was something even elite operators couldn't take lightly. From the west, the sound of military vehicle engines approached. U.S. Special Forces equipped with light plate carriers M4A, 1 carbine's advanced optics, secure comms, and 3 M249S entered the sector. They split into 2 6-man teams, moving in a wedge formation to maintain spacing while ensuring mutual support. Entering the trail leading to the missing pilot, they immediately encountered a thin mist generated by the jet fire spreading to nearby brush. On the ground, scorched earth, twisted metal, and parts of the F-16 lay scattered like the bones of a giant steel beast torn apart. The Mexican side also realized the U.S. was shifting tactics. Their recon unit noted unusual movement on the western ridge where the special ops were flanking. They immediately deployed 2 sniper teams and a B-40 team to block the path. Seeing the Americans change formation and push deeper, Mexico believed the U.S. was launching a raid to retake the territory near Monument 43. They had no idea the real objective was a rescue. The PKMs opened up again. This time thicker, stronger, heavy like a sledgehammer striking hollow steel. The Mexican PKM team from the east laid down grazing fire on the Spec Ops route. Large caliber rounds shredded leaves into confetti. The USM 249 team immediately returned fire with long bursts, keeping distance and creating a window for the rescue team to cross a clearing toward the pilot. The Stryker received orders to shift again, moving closer for direct fire support. The armored vehicle rumbled around a berm and stopped on high ground, looking down on the kill zone. The 30mm turret swung toward the Mexican concentration, ready to fire if they tried to close on the pilot. Opposite them, the damaged Mexican DN-11, despite frontal damage, tried to reverse to screen its infantry. Its heavy engine noise mixed with the sound of churning earth. A new RPG team moved up from behind, using the vehicle as a mobile shield to get closer to the American line. When the U.S. Special Ops closed the distance to under 200 meters, the recon drone sent a warning. A Mexican squad was moving in a flanking arc, trying to reach the pilot's location. This forced the Americans to go full speed. The lead team of 3 broke off, sprinting low through the charred trees. The point man spotted Captain Miller lying motionless, one arm across his stomach, right leg pinned under a piece of curved metal. His heart pounded amidst the rapid gunfire, but battlefield discipline took over. He rushed forward, pulling Miller free from the wreckage. Miller's breathing was shallow, but he was alive. His eyes fluttered open, trying to speak, but the explosions nearby drowned him out. An operator ripped out a med kit, administered a rapid analgesic, and hoisted Miller onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry. As they tried to turn, Mexican AK fire erupted, kicking up dirt in long streaks right at their feet. An operator screamed into his radio, "Needs suppression." They're flanking left. Immediately, the rear M249 opened up toward the left, creating a wall of lead that stopped the Mexican advance. High-velocity rounds shredded the brush like pyrotechnics. Mexican infantry had to dive into ditches, but they returned fire with AKs and M203s. Above, the Stryker joined the chorus. The 30mm screamed like a metal storm, sweeping the Mexican positions. A round detonated against a large boulder where a PKM team was hiding, blowing them sideways. Smoke and fire flared, disrupting the Mexican line for seconds. But Mexico had no intention of retreating. They deployed a recoilless rifle from the eastern slope. 2 soldiers mounted an 82mm recoilless gun on a temporary tripod, aiming straight at the Stryker. The gunner adjusted sights, his jacket flapping in the wind. When the round fired, it left a long trail of fire and screeched like metal being stretched to the breaking point. The Stryker reversed just in time. The round slammed into the dirt in front of it, exploding like a massive firecracker and gouging a deep crater. The U.S. Javelin team received orders for immediate counterfire. They braced the tube, checked the wind, and locked onto the newly appeared recoilless rifle crew. The gunner squeezed, and this time the Javelin wasn't aiming at a tank, but a weapon emplacement. The missile attacked in top-down mode, detonating right over the recoilless rifle, blowing the Mexican soldiers down the slope. The Spec Ops team continued dragging Miller away, entering a relatively sheltered ravine, but the extraction was getting harder. Mexico was mobilizing larger forces from the rear. PKM crossfire from 2 directions made every gap in the trees a death zone. Seeing the situation spiraling, the U.S. forward commander authorized 60mm mortars from the rear. The rounds dropped like hammers of God, detonating in waves. Mexican infantry scattered to avoid the kill radius. 1 mortar round landed dangerously close to a Mexican RPG team, forcing them deeper into the woods. As the Mexican troops scattered, the Americans exploited the gap to open an escape route. They split into 2 groups, one carrying Miller, the other acting as a rear guard. The carry team moved fast along a narrow trail, running past dark, smoking rocks. Mud caked their boots, their ragged breathing mixed with the clatter of gear. Mexico realized the tactic and immediately moved to cut the retreat. An 8-man squad with AKs and M203s rushed in, firing continuously at the extraction line. An M203 round landed less than 5 meters from the Spec Ops team, throwing up a massive clod of earth. The soldier carrying Miller stumbled, nearly dropping the pilot. But the rear team laid down M249 fire, carving a temporary corridor of seconds that allowed them to clear the danger zone. Around them, the battle noise was unceasing. The 30 millimeters from the striker, the hiss of RPGs cutting the air like hot knives, AK and PKM fire weaving together like steel wires. The border forest was no longer a forest. It was a labyrinth of munitions fire and roaring metal. When the U.S. group finally broke out of the main kill zone, the drone reported Mexican reinforcements approaching in military trucks less than 7 minutes out. The damaged DN-11 was trying to pivot to pursue. The U.S. had two choices: retreat fast or commit the whole force to a battalion-level battle in the mountains. But the U.S. hadn't received a full retreat order yet. The battle continued, and before they could get Miller out of the tree line, they had to face a new wave of mechanized units bearing down from the Mexican side. Engine noise from the east roared like a herd of steel beasts. The Mexican reinforcements were moving faster than predicted. In less than 5 minutes, 3 military transport trucks, a field-repaired DN-11, and a squad of infantry loaded with RPGs, M203S, and PKMs reached the zone the Americans had just vacated. Engines mixed with tires crushing dry branches shook the ground, signaling the battle was entering an even more intense phase. Mexican troops dismounted in open order using the trucks as cover while the B-40 team checked angles ready to fire on any American target. Conversely, the American team carrying Captain Miller was moving out of the dense brush, but they had to cross a small valley about 50 meters wide, a completely open kill zone. No big trees, no rocks, just weeds, dry dirt, and small roots insufficient to stop an AK round. To get Miller to the medevac line, they had to cross this void. The danger was so obvious that a single slip of noise half a second too late would compromise the rescue. The U.S. drone overhead scanned the terrain. The screen showed the Mexican pincer movement, one group circling to a high rock ledge to fire down the other, closing on the narrow western trail the Spec Ops team had to take. Time was running out. The U.S. Ground commander opened the emergency channel. All units prepare for high-speed movement. Don't stop, don't scatter. The replies were short and urgent. They knew if Mexico took the high ground, they'd be pinned in the open valley, the nightmare scenario for any infantryman. The American team started running. The soldier with Miller on his shoulders gasped for air. Every step felt like 10 extra pounds crushing his spine. 2-point men cleared the path, rifles sweeping left and right, eyes scanning every shaking bush. Behind them, the M249 team fired while backpedaling, spraying lead to slow the enemy. Before them, the small valley opened up like a giant mouth waiting to swallow anyone who entered. Mexico spotted the movement. An AK volley fired from the north rounds, plunging from height, making sharp zips before burying into the dry earth. Dust kicked up in small puffs. The American team hit the deck by reflex, but staying down meant getting pinned. A soldier yelled, "Break right," and the group surged right toward a protruding root system, offering meager cover for the man carrying Miller. But Mexico wasn't just firing from above. The infantry at the hill's base had reached the tree line, blocking the retreat. A Mexican M203 gunner raised his launcher, firing a high arc round that dropped right in front of the American group. The explosion created a massive flash, shaking the ground. 2 American soldiers were knocked down, fortunately, sustaining no major injuries. The M249 immediately returned fire, pushing the Mexican troops back into the canopy. In the distance, the striker received orders to speed up. The armored vehicle roared, smashing through thin trees to reach a new vantage point to support the Spec Ops team. From the turret, the gunner looked down via thermal sights. Seeing a Mexican squad moving in column toward the valley, he pulled the trigger. A burst of 30 millimeters tore through the woods like steel rain, exploding right next to the Mexican group. Dirt flew up in massive clouds. Trees snapped. The Mexican soldiers were forced to break formation to survive. The striker's support gave the Americans precious seconds. The Spec Ops team accelerated, sprinting straight down the valley. The soldier carrying Miller was near exhaustion, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to let his comrade die in this wilderness. Behind him, 2 others fired continuously, eyes locked on the slightest movement in the leaves. They knew if a single RPG from the woods hit the striker, the team would lose their anchor. As the American team reached the midpoint of the valley, the Mexican sniper on the ledge spotted them. He locked onto the silhouette of a running American soldier. The Dragunov barrel stabilized. He took a deep breath. As he squeezed, the bullet flew on a perfect line. If the soldier behind the M249 hadn't seen the scope glint and screamed, "Sniper," that bullet would have pierced the man carrying Miller. Instead, the M249 gunner lunged left, shoving his buddy down. The bullet grazed his shoulder, leaving a deep bleeding gash. Despite the pain, he swung his machine gun up to the ledge and fired a long burst. The Mexican troops ducked behind the large rock but continued intermittent fire, forcing the Americans to run in zigzags. At the valley entrance, the Mexican PKM team fired another burst. 7.62 millimeters rounds skimmed the ground, sparking off rocks. The American team was running on fumes, but they had to keep going. When one soldier stumbled from the concussive force of a round hitting the dirt nearby, two others hauled him up and pushed him forward. An RPG suddenly streaked from the forest, its trajectory flat and fast, aimed dead center at the valley. If it hit, the whole team would be vaporized. But at that critical moment, the striker had the angle. The gunner pumped 3 30mm rounds into the large tree where the RPG originated. The explosion blew the tree stump apart, throwing the Mexican RPG gunner backward. Finally, the Spec Ops team crossed the valley and crashed into the tree line on the far side. They sat down, gasping sweat, mixing with dust limbs, shaking from adrenaline. But they weren't safe yet. Mexico was still coming. They could clearly hear tires crunching hard on dirt and PKM fire echoing from afar. As the striker retreated to screen the wood line, the U.S. drone detected Mexico preparing to deploy 2 more mechanized vehicles from the southeast. If they didn't leave now, the entire U.S. force would be encircled. With no other choice, U.S. command ordered a full withdrawal west toward higher ground suitable for a medevac landing. They quickly organized. Spec Ops moved Miller first. The M249S and Javelin team stayed back to suppress. The striker reversed slowly, turret sweeping to stop the Mexican advance. When Mexico fired another AK volley, the striker pumped 30mm back, forcing them to scatter. The withdrawal lasted nearly 10 minutes, but felt like an hour. Every meter of ground could hold a trap. Every small sound could be a hidden RPG team. But through tight coordination and continuous suppressive fire, the Americans finally got Captain Miller out of the hot zone. A U.S. Army UH-60 Black Hawk touched down on the high ground. The rotor wash whipped up a mini dust storm. The Spec Ops team ran to load Miller onto the litter. As the helicopter door slid shut, gunfire still echoed in the distance, but the chaotic rhythm of the battle finally began to recede behind them. Looking down from above the entire forest sector where the battle rage was still submerged in smoke and scorch marks, lines of fire zigzagged across the green canopy. Armored vehicles lay tilted craters, blasted open, and broken trees formed a chaotic tableau. It all started with an accidental wingdip of an F-16. A tactical misunderstanding enough to drag 2 forces into a company-level battle, and only luck prevented it from escalating into a full-scale conflict. As the helicopter carried Miller away from the battlefield, the sun was setting. The orange light of dusk covered the forest like a melancholy reminder that war, whether real or simulated, always starts easily but never ends gently.